My toxic CEO fired me, exactly 24 hours before my shares vested. He thought he pulled off the perfect robbery. He didn't know I just legally stole his entire company.
They fired me a day before my shares vested. My contract said otherwise. Chapter 1, the 24-hour betrayal. Tomorrow was supposed to be the day my life changed forever. After 4 grueling years of giving my blood, sweat, and absolute sanity to GIAN Tech, my equity was finally going to vest. We are not talking about a small holiday bonus here. We are talking about $2 million worth of shares. $2 million. That was the exact number I had calculated on my glowing spreadsheet every single night before forcing myself to go to sleep. I had sacrificed my weekends, missed my only sister's wedding, and slept under my cramped desk more times than I care to admit. I had traded my youth for lines of code. All for this company. All for the promise that Victor Sterling, our charismatic and seemingly visionary CEO, had made to me when we were just a struggling startup working out of a freezing garage. "Stick with me, Nolan," he used to say, patting me heavily on the shoulder. "When we make it big, you make it big. We are a family." And against all odds, we did make it big. I was the lead engineer who built the predictive data algorithm that literally put GIAN Tech on the map. Because of my sleepless nights, the company was now on the verge of a massive acquisition by a global tech giant. An acquisition that would send our valuation straight through the roof. My shares were the golden ticket I had earned through pure, unfiltered dedication and countless panic attacks. The vesting date was exactly 24 hours away, just one single day left. I walked into the glass-walled office that morning with a hot coffee in my hand and a smile I physically couldn't hide. I was already planning exactly how I would pay off my parents' crushing mortgage. I was daydreaming about finally taking a vacation to a place that didn't involve answering urgent server alerts at 3 a.m. But the moment I stepped off the elevator, the atmosphere in the office felt completely wrong. The usual morning buzz of keyboards and excited chatter was dead silent. People actively avoided making eye contact with me, suddenly very interested in staring at their shoes. My access badge beeped a harsh red when I tried to swipe into the secure engineering wing. Access denied. I tried it again, thinking it was just a stupid glitch in the security system. Red light again. A cold, heavy dread started to pool in the bottom of my stomach. Before I could even process what was happening, the HR director stepped out of the shadows of the hallway. She didn't look at me with her usual overly cheerful morning greeting. Her face was a stone-cold, professional mask. "Nolan, Victor needs to see you in conference room B," she said, her voice completely devoid of any human emotion. Conference room B, that was the windowless, soundproof room at the very end of the executive hall. The room where people went in, but never came back out with their jobs intact. My stomach dropped completely into my shoes. I told myself I was just being paranoid. I was the lead product developer, the guy who built the very algorithm they were about to sell for hundreds of millions. They couldn't possibly be doing what I thought they were doing. It made absolutely no sense. I pushed open the heavy wooden door to the conference room, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. Victor was sitting right at the head of the long table, flanked by 2 expensive-looking corporate lawyers I had never seen before in my life. He didn't even have the basic decency to stand up and greet me. He just stared at me with these dead, cold, calculating eyes. "Have a seat, Nolan," he muttered, gesturing vaguely to the empty leather chair across from him. I didn't sit down. I stood there, gripping my coffee cup so hard, I genuinely thought the cardboard would burst in my hand. "What is this about, Victor?" I asked, trying desperately to keep my voice steady. He sighed loudly, acting like I was an annoying inconvenience he just wanted to get over with before his next meeting. "We are making some strategic restructuring moves to prepare for the upcoming acquisition. Unfortunately, your position is being eliminated, effective immediately." The words hit me like a physical, heavy punch straight to the chest. Eliminated. Effective immediately. Today, one day before my 4-year cliff. One day before $2 million legally belonged to my name. "You're firing me." I choked out, the suffocating reality crashing down on my shoulders. "Tomorrow is my vesting date, Victor. You know exactly what you're doing right now." Victor leaned forward, steepling his manicured fingers together with a smug, untouchable smirk playing on his lips. "It is just business, Nolan. The board feels we need fresh, more experienced leadership moving forward into this new phase. And as per your standard employment agreement, since you are being terminated before the vesting cliff, all of your unvested shares are returned directly to the company pool." He was stealing it. He was firing his most loyal, hardworking employee 24 hours early just to keep my massive chunk of equity for himself. One of the silent lawyers slid a thick severance package across the polished mahogany table. It was a pathetic, insulting offer. 3 months of base pay in exchange for my absolute silence and a full legal release of all future claims against GIAN Tech. "Sign it, pack up your desk, and security will escort you out of the building," Victor said, already looking down at his glowing phone screen. He really thought he had won. He thought I was just another naive, socially awkward tech worker who would cry, sign the paper, and walk away with my tail tucked between my legs. He thought he knew exactly what was written in my contract. But Victor Sterling had just made one catastrophic, irreversible mistake. He completely forgot who actually wrote the terms of my early employment agreement back in those desperate garage days. I didn't yell at him. I didn't flip the heavy table over in a fit of blind rage. I just looked down at the insulting severance document, let out a soft, dark chuckle that echoed in the quiet room, and looked Victor dead in his arrogant eyes. Because I knew a secret that was about to destroy his entire world. My contract said otherwise. Chapter 2, The Kill Switch. I didn't touch the pen sitting next to that insulting severance package. I just let the heavy silence stretch out in that cold, windowless room until it became absolutely suffocating. Victor finally looked up from his phone, an annoyed frown creeping onto his perfectly moisturized face. "Is there a problem, Nolan?" he asked, his voice dripping with fake corporate sympathy. "You are making this much harder than it needs to be." I looked at the two expensive lawyers who were watching me like hawks waiting for a wounded animal to finally collapse. "I am not signing anything, Victor," I said, my voice shockingly calm. "I don't need your 3 months of pity pay." Victor let out a harsh, mocking laugh and leaned back in his expensive leather chair. "Suit yourself," he sneered, waving his hand dismissively toward the heavy wooden door. "But you are still fired, and those shares are returning to the company pool by the end of business today. Security will escort you to your desk to collect your personal items." I turned around and walked out of conference room B without saying another single word. I could feel the burning stares of my coworkers as 2 massive security guards flanked me down the main hallway. It was the ultimate corporate walk of shame. The guy who literally built the technical foundation of GIAN Tech was being thrown out like yesterday's garbage. People I had mentored, people I had bought dinner for during endless crunch times, suddenly found their computer screens incredibly fascinating. Nobody stood up for me. Nobody even dared to say goodbye. But as I packed my noise-canceling headphones and a framed picture of my dog into a cardboard box, I wasn't feeling sad. I was feeling a dangerous, electric surge of pure adrenaline, because Victor Sterling was a man who only cared about the future. He never bothered to look back at the past. 3 years ago, when GIAN Tech was completely broke and on the verge of total bankruptcy, Victor had begged me to stay. He couldn't afford to pay my salary for 6 straight months. To keep me from walking out the door, he drafted a desperate, customized employment contract to guarantee my equity. We didn't have fancy corporate lawyers back then. We just had a cheap legal template downloaded from the internet and a printer that barely worked. But I had insisted on adding one very specific, non-negotiable clause to the addendum before I signed my life away. A clause that Victor, in his desperate panic to keep his lead engineer, had skimmed over and signed without a second thought. It was a bad faith termination, provision heavily tied to the intellectual property rights of my predictive data algorithm. The clause stated that if I was terminated without justifiable cause within 60 days of a major liquidity event, my vesting schedule wouldn't just accelerate. It was much, much worse than that. The clause explicitly stated that the exclusive licensing rights to the core algorithm would immediately revert back to me as the sole creator. Victor didn't just fire an employee today. He accidentally surrendered the entire legal ownership of the very product he was trying to sell. The acquiring company, a massive conglomerate called Apex Dynamics, was paying $300 million for GIAN Tech. But they weren't buying our ergonomic office chairs, our brand name, or Victor's charming smile. They were buying my algorithm. And as of 9:00 a.m. this morning, GIAN Tech no longer legally owned it. I walked out of the glass double doors and stepped into the blinding morning sunlight. The security guard snatched my access badge from my hand and locked the door behind me. I walked straight to my car, tossed the cardboard box into the passenger seat, and pulled out my laptop. I didn't drive home to cry about my lost job. I sat right there in the company parking lot, connected to my mobile hotspot, and opened my encrypted personal drive. I pulled up the original, digitally signed PDF of my employment contract. There it was, on page 14, buried under a wall of boring legal jargon. Section 7, paragraph B, the kill switch. Victor was probably upstairs right now, popping open a bottle of expensive champagne and celebrating his brilliant financial maneuver. He thought he had just saved himself $2 million by cutting me out of the deal. He had no idea he had just detonated a bomb that would destroy the entire $300 million acquisition. I opened my email client and drafted a new message. I didn't send it to Victor. I didn't send it to GIAN Tech's HR department or their expensive legal team. I addressed it directly to the lead mergers and acquisitions attorney at Apex Dynamics. The subject line was simple, professional, and absolutely lethal. Urgent notice, disputed intellectual property ownership regarding GIAN Tech acquisition. I attached a copy of my contract, highlighted Section 7, and hit send. I watched the little blue loading bar flash across the bottom of the screen. Message sent. A wave of cold, calculating satisfaction washed over me. For 4 years, I had played the role of the quiet, obedient worker bee in the background. I had let Victor take the spotlight in every press release and every investor meeting. But the truth was about to hit his boardroom like a runaway freight train. Apex Dynamics was notorious for their ruthless, zero-tolerance due diligence process. The moment their legal team read that email, alarms were going to sound across their entire corporate headquarters. They would immediately freeze the acquisition funds. They would demand answers that Victor simply did not have. I started my car, the engine roaring to life in the quiet parking lot. I took one last look at the towering glass building of GIAN Tech. Tomorrow was supposed to be my vesting day. But now, tomorrow was going to be the day I took everything back. Chapter 3, the Shockwave. I drove to a small, rundown diner on the edge of town and ordered a black coffee. I didn't drink it. I just sat in the corner booth, staring at the black screen of my phone resting on the sticky Formica table. I knew exactly how the corporate machine worked at the highest levels. Apex Dynamics was a multi-billion-dollar apex predator, and they did not play games with their investments. When you are buying a tech company for $300 million, you expect to own the actual technology. It took exactly 47 minutes for my phone to light up. It wasn't Victor. It was an unknown number from a New York area code. I took a deep breath, let it out slowly, and swiped the green button to answer. "Nolan Hayes," I said, keeping my voice perfectly flat and professional. "Mr. Hayes, my name is Evelyn Vance, Senior M&A Counsel for Apex Dynamics," a sharp, icy voice replied. She didn't bother asking how my day was going or making small talk. "I am calling regarding the email and the contract attachment you sent to our legal department this morning. Are you stating, on the official legal record, that Kalen Tech does not hold the exclusive rights to the predictive data algorithm. I smiled, even though she couldn't see my face. I am stating that as of 9:00 a.m. this morning, my employment was terminated without cause by Victor Sterling. According to Section 7, Paragraph B of my founding contract, that specific action immediately triggers a full reversion of the IP rights back to me. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint, rapid sound of furious typing in the background. Mr. Hayes, we have immediately suspended the acquisition funds pending a full legal review of this document, Evelyn finally said, her tone completely shifting. If this clause holds up in court, Victor Sterling has attempted to sell us an empty shell. I advise you to retain aggressive counsel immediately. We will be in touch. The line went dead with a sharp click. I set the phone back down on the table and finally took a sip of my cold, bitter coffee. The bomb had officially detonated. Now, it was time to wait for the shockwave to hit the glass walls of Kalen Tech. I didn't have to wait very long. 10 minutes later, my phone vibrated violently against the wooden table. The caller ID flashed a name I knew very well, Victor Sterling. I watched his name light up the screen, vibrating continuously, demanding my immediate obedience. For 4 years, whenever that name appeared on my screen, my heart would race and I would answer by the second ring. I used to drop everything, my dinner, my sleep, my family, just to appease his endless demands. Not today. I let it ring until it went straight to voicemail. 30 seconds later, he called again. Then he called again. Then came the text messages, popping up in rapid, frantic succession on my lock screen. Nolan, pick up the phone right now. What the hell did you just send to Apex? You are violating your NDA. Answer me immediately. Call me back. We need to clear up this misunderstanding before it gets out of hand. Misunderstanding. That was an incredibly funny word for trying to rob someone of $2 million and throwing them out on the street. I picked up my phone and tapped the voicemail icon to listen to his first message. Victor's voice filled my ear, but the smooth, arrogant tone from the conference room was completely gone. He sounded breathless, panicked, and dangerously unhinged. Nolan, listen to me very carefully. His recorded voice hissed through the tiny speaker. Apex just froze the entire acquisition account and locked our executives out of the data room. They are threatening to pull out of the deal and sue Kalen Tech for fraudulent misrepresentation. Whatever fake, outdated contract you sent them, you need to retract it right now. You are playing a very dangerous game, Nolan, and I promise you will lose. Call me back before I have my lawyers destroy your entire life. The voicemail ended with a sharp, angry beep. I leaned back in the torn vinyl diner booth and let out a long, deeply satisfied exhale. Victor was absolutely terrified. He was sitting in his pristine corner office, surrounded by his expensive lawyers, realizing that he had just handed me the keys to his entire kingdom. He thought he could fire me and take my shares, but instead, he had just given me the whole company. Because without my algorithm, Kalen Tech was completely worthless. I didn't reply to his threatening texts. I didn't call him back to negotiate. I just paid for my coffee, walked out to my car, and drove home to prepare for the impending bloodbath. The 24-hour countdown to my vesting date wasn't over yet. And by tomorrow morning, Victor Sterling was going to be the one begging for a severance package. Chapter 4, The Counterattack. I didn't go to sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen island with the cold glow of my laptop illuminating the dark, empty room. If I was going to wage war against a multi-million-dollar corporation, I needed a general. I couldn't just walk into a boardroom with my printed PDF and hope for the best. I needed a legal shark who specialized in intellectual property and corporate bloodbaths. I spent 3 hours digging through obscure legal directories, looking for the exact right person to dismantle Victor Sterling. That was when I found Marcus Thorne. Marcus wasn't a polished corporate defender who played golf with wealthy CEOs on the weekends. He was a ruthless, independent litigator who had built his entire career tearing apart greedy tech executives. I sent him an encrypted email at 2:00 a.m. with a very specific subject line: $300 million IP theft. I attached the contract and typed a brief, factual summary of Victor's fatal mistake. I honestly didn't expect a reply until the sun came up, but my phone rang exactly 12 minutes later. "Mr. Hayes, tell me this contract is legally binding and not some forged internet garbage," a gravelly voice barked through the speaker. "It is legally binding, signed by the CEO himself and witnessed by a public notary," I replied smoothly. I heard a low, dark chuckle on the other end of the line. "I am looking at Section 7, Paragraph B right now, and I have to admit, it is a thing of absolute beauty. Victor Sterling basically handed you the live detonator to his own company. I will take your case on contingency, Nolan, because making guys like Victor cry is my favorite hobby. Be at my office at 7:00 a.m. sharp." I arrived at Marcus's downtown office just as the morning light was starting to break over the city skyline. His office was a chaotic mess of thick legal briefs and empty coffee cups, but his eyes were sharp and intensely focused. He slapped a heavy stack of printed documents onto his massive oak desk. "Apex Dynamics' legal team has been blowing up my phone since 4:00 a.m., Marcus said, leaning against the edge of his desk. "They ran your contract through their own forensic legal department. It is completely ironclad, Nolan. Victor breached the bad faith termination clause, which means the intellectual property reverted to you the exact second he fired you. Kalen Tech currently owns nothing but fancy office furniture and a very expensive commercial lease." A surge of pure vindication washed over me, so powerful it almost made my hands shake. "So, what is our exact next move?" I asked, looking down at the intimidating legal papers. Marcus grinned, revealing a row of perfectly white, predatory teeth. "Victor's lawyers just sent over an emergency settlement offer 10 minutes ago. They are officially offering you $5 million and your original vested shares to sign the IP back over to Kalen Tech immediately. They are terrified that Apex Dynamics is going to walk away from the $300 million deal entirely." $5 million. Yesterday morning, I would have dropped to my knees and cried tears of absolute joy for that kind of money. Yesterday, I just wanted my fair share of the pie I helped bake. But Victor didn't just try to take my money. He tried to humiliate me, erase my legacy, and throw me out the door like I was absolutely nothing. "Reject it," I said, my voice cold and completely devoid of any hesitation. Marcus raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed by my total lack of fear. "Are you absolutely sure about that, Nolan? If we reject this, Victor is going to back Kalen Tech into a corner, and things will get incredibly ugly." "I want it to get ugly," I replied, staring out the window at the towering corporate buildings. "I don't want his hush money. I want the algorithm, I want the company, and I want Victor Sterling removed from his position as CEO." Marcus laughed out loud, a booming sound that echoed off the glass walls of his office. "I was really hoping you would say that. Apex Dynamics is holding an emergency board meeting at noon today to officially terminate the Kalen Tech acquisition. We are going to crash that meeting, and we are going to offer them a brand new deal. A deal where Victor Sterling gets absolutely nothing." The game had completely changed. I wasn't just fighting to get my old job back anymore. I was fighting to take his throne. Chapter 5: The Ambush. Walking into the global headquarters of Apex Dynamics felt like stepping into an impenetrable fortress of wealth and power. The lobby alone was the size of a commercial airplane hangar, lined with imported Italian marble and towering glass pillars. Just 24 hours ago, I was a disposable code monkey who wasn't even allowed to park in the executive lot. Now, I was walking past 3 different layers of elite corporate security without even breaking a sweat. Marcus walked beside me, his battered leather briefcase swinging at his side like a loaded weapon. "Remember the plan, Nolan," Marcus whispered as we stepped into the silent, high-speed glass elevator. Victor is going to scream, he is going to threaten, and he is going to try to intimidate you. Do not break eye contact, and let me do the legal heavy lifting. You are the king of the castle now, so you need to act like it. I nodded slowly, watching the floor numbers tick upwards at lightning speed. Floor 50, floor 60, floor 75. The elevator doors slid open with a soft, expensive chime, revealing a massive boardroom overlooking the entire city. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls of the conference room, I could see exactly what was happening inside. Victor Sterling was standing at the head of a massive obsidian table, sweating profusely through his custom-tailored suit. He was frantically gesturing at a glowing presentation screen, desperately trying to convince a room full of stone-faced Apex executives that the deal was still viable. His two expensive corporate lawyers looked like they were attending a funeral. At the opposite end of the table sat Evelyn Vance, the ICM&A counsel I had spoken to on the phone. She looked bored, unimpressed, and completely merciless. Marcus didn't bother knocking on the heavy glass door. He simply pushed it open and walked right into the middle of Victor's frantic presentation. "Excuse the interruption, ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced, his booming voice cutting through the tense air like a machete. "But we figured it was best to hear the truth straight from the actual owner of the GIAN tech algorithm." The entire room went dead silent. Victor froze mid-sentence, his face draining of all color until he looked like a terrified ghost. "What the hell are you doing here?" Victor hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of pure rage and absolute panic. "Security," he yelled, looking wildly toward the heavy glass doors. "Get this disgruntled ex-employee out of this building immediately." Nobody moved. Evelyn Vance slowly lowered her pen and looked directly at Victor with eyes as cold as liquid nitrogen. "Sit down and shut up, Victor," she commanded, her voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying absolute authority. "You do not give orders in my building." Victor's mouth opened and closed like a suffocating fish, but no sound came out. He slowly sank back into his leather chair, his arrogant facade completely shattering into a million pieces. Evelyn turned her piercing gaze toward me and gestured to the two empty seats at the center of the table. "Mr. Hayes, I presume?" she asked, a faint hint of corporate respect entering her voice. "Please take a seat." I walked over and sat down directly across from Victor, making sure to lock my eyes onto his terrified face. He looked like a man who was watching his entire life burn to the ground in slow motion. Marcus opened his battered briefcase and slid a thick stack of freshly printed legal documents across the obsidian table. "Let us skip the corporate theater and get straight to the point," Marcus said, addressing the room of Apex executives. "Victor Sterling attempted to defraud Apex Dynamics by selling you intellectual property that he legally forfeited yesterday morning. My client, Nolan Hayes, is now the sole, undisputed owner of the predictive data algorithm. The $300 million acquisition of GIAN Tech is officially dead." A collective murmur rippled through the room of powerful executives. Victor buried his face in his trembling hands, finally realizing the catastrophic magnitude of his arrogance. "However," Marcus continued, his voice rising to command the room once again, "my client recognizes the immense value of a partnership with Apex Dynamics. We are not here to kill the deal. We are here to restructure it." Evelyn leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, suddenly very interested in what we had to say. "I am listening, Mr. Thorne," she said smoothly. I looked at Marcus, and he gave me a subtle, confirming nod. It was my turn to speak. It was my turn to hold the knife. "Apex Dynamics will still pay $300 million for the algorithm," I said, my voice echoing clearly in the massive room. "But you are not buying GIAN Tech. You are buying a brand new holding company, entirely owned and operated by me." Victor's head snapped up, his eyes wide with absolute horror. "You can't do that," Victor screamed, slamming his fists onto the table in a desperate, pathetic display of power. I built GIAN Tech from the ground up. You are stealing my company. I looked at him, feeling absolutely no pity for the man who had tried to ruin my life just 24 hours ago. I am not stealing anything, Victor, I replied softly. I am just taking out the trash. Chapter 6, The Execution. The boardroom remained dead silent after my words echoed off the thick glass walls. Victor was breathing heavily, his chest heaving violently as if he had just sprinted a marathon. He looked frantically at his two expensive corporate lawyers, silently begging them to pull a legal miracle out of thin air. But they just stared down at their polished shoes, completely paralyzed by the ironclad reality of the contract sitting on the table. One of the lawyers was actually slowly zipping up his briefcase, silently calculating how fast he could run away before Victor's company went completely bankrupt. They knew the battle was already lost before we even walked through the heavy doors. Evelyn Vance, the ICM&A counsel, didn't even flinch at Victor's pathetic, desperate outburst. She slowly turned her attention away from the sweating CEO and focused entirely on me. A brand new holding company, Evelyn repeated softly, tapping her expensive silver pen against the obsidian table. You are proposing that we bypass GIAN Tech completely and acquire the core asset directly from you. That is exactly what I am proposing, I replied, keeping my posture perfectly straight and my voice completely steady. Without the predictive data algorithm, GIAN Tech is nothing but a hollow shell with a very expensive commercial lease. I built the engine that makes the entire car run, Evelyn. Victor just painted the outside and tried to sell it to you at a massive, unjustified markup. A faint, razor-sharp smile finally broke through Evelyn's stoic corporate mask. Apex Dynamics didn't care about Victor's feelings, his fragile ego, or his supposed legacy in the tech industry. They were apex predators who only cared about securing the most profitable asset with the absolute least amount of legal friction. If we proceed with this new structure, Mr. Hayes, what happens to GIAN Tech? Evelyn asked, her eyes gleaming with calculated interest. Before I could even answer, Victor slammed his fists on the table again, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. You cannot legally do this to me. Victor shouted, his voice cracking under the immense, suffocating pressure. I am the CEO of GIAN Tech, and I demand that security remove these trespassers from the building immediately. Evelyn didn't even raise her voice when she delivered the final, crushing blow. Victor, if you do not sit down and remain completely silent, I will personally have you escorted out of this building. You lied to our acquisition team, you misrepresented your legal assets, and you wasted millions of dollars of our time. As of this exact moment, Apex Dynamics has zero interest in acquiring GIAN Tech. Your company is officially dead to us. The words hit Victor like a physical shotgun blast straight to the chest. He collapsed back into his leather chair, his arrogant posture completely crumbling into a pathetic pile of defeat. He had fired me to save $2 million, and in the process, he had just vaporized a $300 million empire. Marcus leaned forward, pulling a fresh, crisp folder from his battered leather briefcase. Now that the dead weight has been officially cut, let us discuss the future, Marcus said, sliding a new contract toward Evelyn. Nolan's new holding company will transfer exclusive licensing rights to Apex Dynamics for the agreed-upon $300 million. However, my client has one additional, non-negotiable condition before he signs anything today. Evelyn raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, clearly intrigued by the sudden power play. We are already bypassing a massive corporate structure to accommodate you, Mr. Hayes. What else could you possibly want? I looked directly at Victor, who was staring at the mahogany table with hollow, defeated, empty eyes. GIAN Tech still owes a massive amount of money to their private investors, and without this acquisition, they will file for bankruptcy by Friday, I said calmly. When they liquidate, I want Apex Dynamics to purchase GIAN Tech's physical assets, their office space, and their remaining employee contracts. I want every single engineer, developer, and staff member who worked under me to keep their jobs. Except for Victor Sterling, want a legally binding clause, stating that Victor is permanently barred from holding any executive position within the new subsidiary. Victor's head snapped up, a look of pure, unadulterated horror washing over his pale, sweating face. I wasn't just taking his money and his company. I was taking his entire legacy and erasing his name from the industry forever. Evelyn looked at the contract, looked at Victor's broken expression, and then looked back at me with a look of pure respect. She picked up her expensive silver pen, unscrewed the cap, and signed her name on the dotted line. The king was officially dead, and I was the one who pulled the trigger. Chapter 7: The Kingdom. The sound of Evelyn's pen scratching against the thick paper was the loudest noise in the entire room. It was the sound of a $300 million empire changing hands in less than 10 seconds. Victor didn't scream or throw another childish tantrum. He just sat there, completely hollowed out, staring at the polished obsidian table as if he couldn't comprehend reality. His 2 expensive lawyers didn't even bother saying goodbye to him. They quietly packed their leather briefcases, nodded respectfully to Evelyn, and walked out the heavy glass doors without looking back. They knew a sinking ship when they saw one, and Victor Sterling was currently resting at the bottom of the ocean. "Security will escort you out of the building now, Victor," Evelyn said, her voice completely devoid of any sympathy. "And I highly recommend you contact a bankruptcy attorney before the end of the business day." 2 massive security guards in dark suits stepped into the boardroom, grabbing Victor by the arms and lifting him out of his leather chair. He didn't fight them. He just looked at me one last time, his eyes filled with a toxic mixture of pure hatred and absolute disbelief. Yesterday, he was a tech visionary preparing to cash a 9-figure check and buy a private island. Today, he was a broke, disgraced former CEO being physically dragged out of a corporate lobby. I watched the heavy glass doors close behind him, feeling a deep, powerful sense of closure wash over my entire body. Marcus clapped me heavily on the shoulder, a massive, predatory grin stretched across his face. "Congratulations, Mr. Hayes," Marcus laughed, packing his own battered briefcase. "You just pulled off the most ruthless, perfectly executed corporate coup I have ever seen in my entire career." But the day wasn't completely over yet. There was still one more thing I needed to do before I could finally go home and sleep. I needed to return to the exact same building I had been kicked out of 24 hours ago. When Marcus and I walked through the glass double doors of GIAN Tech, the atmosphere was completely different than yesterday morning. The news of the Apex Dynamics restructuring had already leaked through the corporate grapevine. The entire office was in a state of absolute, chaotic panic. Employees were frantically packing their cardboard boxes, terrified that the company was liquidating and their paychecks were going to bounce. The HR director, the same woman who had coldly escorted me to Victor's office yesterday, physically froze when she saw me walk through the lobby. She dropped a stack of exit paperwork all over the floor, her eyes wide with absolute shock. I didn't say a single word to her. I just walked straight past the reception desk and headed directly toward the executive wing. The engineering team, my former friends who had stared at their shoes while I was fired, parted like the Red Sea as I walked down the hallway. They looked at me with a mixture of intense fear and overwhelming confusion. I stopped right in the middle of the open plan office, making sure every single person in the room could hear my voice. "Nobody is packing their boxes today," I announced, my voice carrying clearly over the dead silence of the room. GIAN Tech is officially being absorbed by Apex Dynamics as a new, independent subsidiary. Your jobs are safe, your salaries are secured, and your benefits are remaining completely intact. A collective, massive sigh of relief echoed through the entire floor. People literally slumped against their desks, some of them wiping tears of pure relief from their eyes. "However," I continued, my voice hardening just a fraction, "there is going to be one major change in the executive leadership structure, effective immediately." I turned around and pointed directly at the massive, glass-walled corner office at the end of the hall. Victor's office. That office is currently vacant, I stated coldly. And I am going to need someone to help me move my desk inside. The absolute irony of the situation was almost too sweet to handle. 24 hours ago, I was begging for my rightful equity in a windowless interrogation room. Now, I was the undisputed king of the entire building. I walked slowly toward the heavy glass door of the corner office, feeling the eyes of 50 different engineers burning into my back. Victor's personal assistant was standing outside the door, trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. She held out a silver master keycard with shaking hands, terrified that I was going to fire her on the spot. I took it gently, smiled at her, swiped it against the digital lock, and pushed the heavy door open. The office smelled like expensive cologne and pure, unfiltered arrogance. Victor's custom-tailored golf clubs were still leaning against the panoramic window, completely abandoned in his panic. I walked around the massive mahogany desk and sat down in the incredibly expensive leather chair. It was the exact same chair Victor was sitting in when he tried to ruin my life. I spun around, looking out over the sprawling city skyline, feeling a sense of absolute, untouchable peace. The war was officially over. But the most important lesson of this entire ordeal was just beginning. Chapter 8, The Legacy. 6 months have passed since the day I walked into Victor Sterling's office and claimed his leather chair. The transition into the Apex Dynamics ecosystem wasn't just smooth, it was wildly, unbelievably profitable. With their massive global infrastructure and my predictive data algorithm running at full capacity, our new subsidiary shattered every single revenue projection in the first quarter. Apex Dynamics injected $50 million of immediate capital into our development pipeline. But I didn't buy a private island, a mega-yacht, or a fleet of useless sports cars. The very first thing I did was log into my banking app and wire the exact remaining balance of my parents' crushing mortgage directly to their account. Hearing my mother cry tears of absolute joy over the phone was worth infinitely more than any corporate title or corner office. The second thing I did was restructure the employment contracts of every single engineer and developer who stayed loyal to the mission. I gave them the lucrative equity shares that Victor had constantly promised, but never actually intended to deliver. When you treat the people who build your foundation with actual human respect, they will gladly build you an unstoppable empire. As for Victor Sterling, his spectacular, humiliating downfall became an absolute legend in the Silicon Valley ecosystem. When Apex Dynamics officially pulled out of the original GIAN tech deal, Victor's private investors absolutely panicked. They aggressively audited the company's internal financials and discovered years of reckless spending, phantom accounts, and gross executive negligence. Victor wasn't just completely broke. He was buried under a suffocating mountain of catastrophic litigation. He tried to sue me, of course, because arrogant men never know when to accept defeat. He hired a desperate, bottom-tier law firm to challenge the bad faith termination clause in my contract. Marcus Thorne, my absolute shark of a lawyer, destroyed their entire case in less than 15 minutes during the preliminary court hearing. The judge actually laughed out loud at Victor's legal team before throwing the ridiculous lawsuit out with extreme prejudice. The last I heard through the corporate grapevine, Victor was working as a mid-level project manager for a failing logistics startup in a bleak industrial park in Ohio. He doesn't have a panoramic corner office anymore. He doesn't have custom-tailored golf clubs, expensive imported cologne, or a team of ruthless lawyers to bully his hardworking employees. He is just another anonymous face in a crowded, gray cubicle farm, answering to managers who are half his age. Sometimes, I sit in my glass-walled office, looking out over the sprawling city skyline, and I think about that freezing, cramped garage where GIAN Tech started. I think about the 4 grueling years of lost sleep, the missed family holidays, and the crushing anxiety of building something brilliant from absolutely nothing. Victor thought my quiet, relentless dedication was a glaring sign of weakness. He thought that because I didn't demand the bright spotlight, I didn't know my own true worth in the marketplace. But that is the fatal, tragic flaw of arrogant, narcissistic leaders. They get so blinded by the beautiful view from the top of the mountain that they completely forget who is holding up the fragile ground beneath their expensive shoes. They think corporate loyalty is a one-way street, designed exclusively to serve their own greedy, selfish ambitions. Victor Sterling tried to steal my entire life's work just 24 hours before I crossed the ultimate finish line. He thought he was an untouchable genius, playing a master-level game of three-dimensional chess against a naive pawn. But he forgot the most important, fundamental rule of the cutthroat corporate world. Never hand a fully loaded legal weapon to the exact same person who wrote the instruction manual. My name is Nolan Hayes, and I didn't just survive a brutal corporate betrayal. I completely weaponized it. Welcome to DramaVerse, where hidden power always reveals itself when the arrogant choose to underestimate the quiet. If you loved this emotional story about workplace revenge, corporate drama, and instant karma, make sure to hit that subscribe button for more cinematic storytelling. Have you ever had a toxic boss try to steal your credit or fire you unjustly just to save a few dollars? Let me know exactly how you handled the situation in the comments section below. Until next time, always remember to read the fine print, know your worth, and never let anyone steal the legacy you built with your own two hands.